conclusions on that. Moving swiftly on, I would now like to introduce Professor Deepak Nayyar, our esteemed keynote speaker, who is of course known to the ILO because he was a former member of the World Commission on the Social Dimension of Globalization. We worked together at that time. Professor Nayyar's work is widely published. He holds the position of Emeritus Professor of Economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. From 2008 to 2012, he was a distinguished professor of economics at the New School for Social Research in New York. He is an honorary fellow of Balliol College at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom and holds distinguished fellowship in both Delhi and Geneva. The Order of Merit of the Italian Republic was conferred on him by the President of Italy in 2007. Professor Nayyar, now it is my pleasure to welcome you to the World of Work Summit. Please come to the lectern and address the conference, and welcome, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Director General, Ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be in your midst this morning, and I would like to thank the Director General of the ILO for this invitation to address such a distinguished gathering. The object of my keynote speech is to analyze the critical importance of employment in the wider context of the world economy. It might be somewhat different from the conventional discourse and the usual debate on the subject. For one, it seeks to focus on the macroeconomic aspects of employment rather than the microeconomic concerns about the world of work. For another, it considers employment not only in developing countries, but also in industrialized countries. In the second decade of the 21st century, the world economy is confronted with two serious problems. First, the financial crisis that surfaced in late 2008 led to a sharp contraction in trade, output, and employment. It is more than 5 years since then, but the Great Recession that followed in its aftermath persists. Recovery is slow, uneven, and fragile. In a few countries where output has recovered, employment has not. In many countries, the crisis runs deep and the prospects are uncertain. The manifestations and the consequences are visible and tangible. Second, beginning around 1980, there has been a rapid increase in economic inequality among people almost everywhere in the world. The distribution of income between people within countries and people in the world as a whole has worsened. The share of the poorest 50% of the population in national income has contracted almost everywhere, while the share of the richest 1% or even top 1/10 of 1%, the super rich or the ultra rich, has risen rapidly almost everywhere. This change is less visible and almost silent, yet it is politically unsustainable and ethically unacceptable. I shall argue that employment can provide a sustainable solution to both problems. It is the way forward for reviving growth and reducing inequality. The essential argument developed in the macroeconomic sphere is simple. The slowdown in economic growth and employment creation are both associated with a worsening income distribution. At the same time, a deterioration in the quality of employment has accentuated economic inequalities. But there are no trade-offs between output growth and job creation. Growth can create jobs, and jobs can drive growth, reinforcing each other. More employment and better jobs would also mitigate problems arising from inequality. In this process, every dimension of employment matters, not only its quantum, but also its quality and terms. The structure of my presentation is as follows. First, I will sketch a global picture to suggest that employment expansion is the path to growth with stability in the world economy. Second, I will consider the national context to explain the phenomenon of jobless growth in terms of underlying changes in income distribution, which have not only squeezed employment, but also dampened growth. Third, I will discuss how to resolve this problem, which must begin with a rethinking of macroeconomic policies to revive wage-led growth and stimulate profit-led growth, which shows that there are complementarities rather than trade-offs between employment creation and economic growth. Last but not least, I will draw together some simple yet striking conclusions that emerge. The world economy is confronted with a serious dilemma: restoration of growth based on debt-driven consumption and asset price inflation in the United States and in the European Union deficit countries will only postpone adjustment or the day of reckoning and accentuate financial fragility. Fiscal consolidation and retrenchment by deficit countries and indebted consumers, even if it reduces financial fragility, will lead to global deflation and stagnation. But this supposed trade-off between financial stability and economic growth is a false dilemma, because neither growth nor stability would be sustainable for long. What we need is both. Stability and growth together can provide a sustainable solution. Recovery would be sustainable if and only if there is a progressive reduction in global macroeconomic imbalances. In this context, there is a natural focus on the United States, which is the largest importer and the reserve currency country, and China, which is the largest exporter and the biggest lender to the United States. But such a characterization of imbalances is incomplete and insufficient. For one, the current account deficits and surpluses of economies reflect gaps between income and expenditure at a macro level. For another, apart from the United States, some EU countries and some emerging economies run large current account deficits, just as, apart from China, Germany and Japan run large current account surpluses. The United States, the EU deficit countries, and a few emerging economies have lived beyond their means for some time, while China, Germany and Japan have lived below their means for some time. This provides a more complete picture of imbalances in the world economy. The rebalancing that is needed, however, is easier said than done. In the current account surplus countries, there is a serious problem of underconsumption. In China, for example, since the late 1990s, there has been a continuous decline in private consumption as a proportion of GDP, which is attributable to a steady decline in the share of wages in GDP. Similarly, in Germany and Japan, during the 2000s, there has been a discernible decline in the share of wages in GDP, which has led to a decline in private consumption as a proportion of GDP since 2005. That was significant in Germany and modest in Japan. In the United States and the EU deficit countries, the share of wages in GDP witnessed a similar decline, but not quite the same in the emerging economies which have large current account deficits. The share of wages in GDP has declined. This has led to a decline in private consumption as a proportion of GDP, which was not supported by debt financing. Yet, current account deficits persisted or surfaced because governments or private sectors with increasingly unequal income distributions, or both, have lived beyond their means. The global imbalances, then, are a matter of economics rather than geography. It is income distribution that lies at the heart of the problem. In Germany and Japan, but even more so in China, real wages lagged behind productivity growth, so that the share of wages in GDP fell while the share of profits in GDP rose. The story about changes in the share of wages and profits in GDP was roughly the same in industrialized countries and emerging economies that ran current account deficits. It is no surprise that markets and globalization strengthened capital and weakened labor. The mobility of capital and the immobility of labor, combined with flexible labor markets, reinforce this process. The rebalancing in the world economy, therefore, needs some redistribution of income within these countries. China needs to shift from export-led growth to consumption-led growth. Germany and Japan need to shift from external markets to domestic markets as a source of growth. This is possible only if there is an increase in the share of wages in GDP and real wages keep pace with productivity growth. It requires the pursuit of full employment and the acceptance of higher wages. The United States, as also the EU deficit countries, need to shift from consumption-led growth to export-led growth. It might be difficult for exports to lead growth in the short run, as competitiveness is not simply a matter of exchange rates. And it might be difficult to squeeze consumption levels for people who have seen almost no increase in their real wages over a long period of time. Consumption based on household debt is obviously not sustainable, but consumption that is based on more employment and higher wages would be sustainable and could provide domestic demand to drive growth. For emerging economies with current account deficits, export-led growth is a limited option for a few. However, if all of them adopt that strategy, it would only exacerbate global imbalances. But the domestic market could provide a more sustainable source of demand to drive economic growth. Therefore, even in deficit countries, an increase in the share of wages in GDP should be conducive to growth. The logic of my argument is simple. It is time to place full employment center stage once again as the primary objective of macroeconomic policies in both industrialized countries and emerging economies. For what is good for employment is good for economic growth. The connection is causal. It is only increased employment that can provide a sustainable solution to the crisis and in the process deliver growth with equity. Such a rebalancing would also provide stability with growth. In the national context, in contrast with my global perspective, jobless growth describes the reality of the past 3 decades. Output growth has been sustained by increases in labor productivity rather than increases in employment. Technological progress has made it possible to use a small number of highly skilled workers at much higher levels of productivity, the benefits of which accrue in the form of higher profits and, to a limited extent, higher wages for a few, so that much of the workforce is not part of these increments in output. Most industrialized countries have experienced this since 1980. It is just as true in many developing countries, in particular the emerging economies, where rapid economic growth has not been associated with commensurate employment creation, as the employment elasticity of output growth has declined almost everywhere in the age of markets and globalization. This jobless growth is neither accident nor coincidence. It is the outcome of changes in policies that have stressed more openness in trade, investment, and finance. Such a worldview, of which orthodox macroeconomics and financial liberalization are an integral part, has meant an increase in the relative importance of foreign markets as compared to the domestic market, so that countries have sought to stimulate demand through an export surplus rather than demand management at home by governments through fiscal and monetary policies. There is, of course, a fallacy of composition here. It is not possible for all countries to achieve an export surplus at the same time. The export surplus of some must be matched by an import surplus of others. Even for some of the countries that run an export surplus, such policies may turn out to be counterproductive if the contraction in domestic markets turns out to be more than the expansion in external markets. Yet, industrialized countries and emerging economies alike have attempted to be more price competitive than their rivals by reducing unit costs of production. This has been achieved by wage restraint and labor market flexibility on the one hand, and raising labor productivity on the other. It is no surprise that integration into world markets has created a strong pressure to reduce costs through the labor market, not simply to attain price competitiveness, but also to attract foreign investment. Such policies have carried the danger of a contraction in domestic demand, since wage restraint depresses consumption by workers at a macro level. At the same time, increases in labor productivity brought about by downsizing of the workforce through restructuring of firms at a micro level reinforces this depressive effect. In the enthusiasm for supply-side economics, it is often forgotten that demand also matters. On the demand side, expansion can be wage-led when driven by consumption demand, or profit-led when driven by investment demand, or a mix of both. During the golden age of capitalism from the late 40s to the early 70s, associated with rapid growth and full employment in the industrialized world, it was both wage-led and profit-led. In the age of markets and globalization from the early 1980s until now, characterized by slower growth and much higher unemployment, it has clearly not been wage-led and has been only weakly profit-led. If aggregate demand is weakly profit-led, where a big change in productivity growth does not stimulate much growth in demand, the outcome is little employment expansion. The story does not end with the recognition or explanation of the unfolding reality of jobless growth. It is also necessary to understand how and why this phenomenon might be responsible for lower rates of growth, not only of employment, but also of output. The causation runs through income distribution. In industrialized countries, there is a redistribution of incomes from wages to profits, and a redistribution of profits from the real sector, whether manufacturing or services, to the financial sector. The possibilities of wage-led growth are obviously constrained. But even profit-led growth is not quite feasible. The financial sector creates a demand for financial assets rather than goods or services, so that there is little or no employment creation. In fact, the shift in income and wealth to the super-rich creates a large demand drag. In developing countries, particularly emerging economies, but also elsewhere, there is a similar redistribution of income from wages to profits that curbs the possibilities of wage-led growth. There is, at the same time, a redistribution of profits, partly to the financial sector in emerging economies that are integrated into international financial markets, but in larger part to profits in the form of quasi-rents derived from property rights in land or in natural resources acquired through patronage of governments, which also weakens profit-led growth. The problem has been compounded by orthodox macroeconomic thinking, which is now deeply embedded in finance ministries and central banks across the world. Over the past 3 decades, the focus of macro policies everywhere has become narrower with the passage of time, in industrialized countries as much as in developing countries. The reason put forward is that if the government succeeds in achieving price stability in the short run, all else, including growth, would follow. The presumption that full employment and economic growth would materialize as corollaries was, of course, belied by experience in both industrialized and developing countries. It would be exceedingly difficult to resolve these problems confronting the world economy without rethinking the macro policies that have accentuated these problems. The dominant ideology of our times has been dented, if not discredited, by the global economic crisis. And it is beginning to lose its stranglehold on thinking, at least in political processes, if not the ivory towers of academia. There is a growing recognition that markets are no magic wand, that the invisible hand of the market is not visible because it is not there, and that markets are good servants but bad masters. It is clear that the financial crisis and the persistent recession provide an opportunity to rethink macroeconomic policies. In sum, it is essential to return to a developmental approach to macroeconomic policies, which is based on an integration of short-term countercyclical fiscal and monetary policies with long-term development objectives. This should shift the focus from the financial sector to the real economy, from the short-term to the long-term, and for equilibrium to development. Economic growth with full employment should be the fundamental objective of macroeconomic policies. Such rethinking is easier said than done because it requires doing away with some beliefs that have acquired sanctity in orthodoxy that exercises enormous influence. Orthodox macroeconomic policies are often shaped by a simple analogy between governments and households, which propagates the belief that just as it is not possible for households to live beyond their means, for it can only end in financial ruin, it is not possible for governments to live beyond their means, for deficits and debt can both become unsustainable. The prescription is downsizing of government to balance income and expenditure. Of course, this reasoning is based on a false analogy. The essential point is that what is efficient for a household at a micro level is not necessarily efficient for governments at a macro level because the whole is different from the sum total of the parts. Yet, orthodoxy about balanced budgets holds sway, even if its manifestations are slightly different in industrialized economies and developing countries. In the industrialized world, the message of orthodox economics is clear. First, governments should focus on price stability and not on employment levels. Second, beyond balanced budgets, there is a need to downsize government. The quest for price stability in a situation where rates of inflation are already so low leads to a slowdown in growth and an increase in unemployment combined with a downward pressure on real wages. It is no surprise that the stress on the supply side turns a blind eye to the demand side. Wages are costs on the supply side, but wages also determine market size on the demand side. And aggregate demand, which remains a determinant of growth, reinforces the slowdown. The belief in the necessity and virtue of downsizing government leads, in one way or another, to a dilution and erosion of social protection. The increase in unemployment and the decrease in social protection taken together have the greatest impact on the living conditions of people who are most vulnerable. In the developing world, orthodox macroeconomics prescribes two essentials. First, it is in situations of disequilibrium or crisis, governments should not attempt to attain more employment. Instead, governments are urged to accept the pain of adjustment in the form of lower output today for a higher output tomorrow. This recommendation conforms to what I call the strong spring analogy. The harder you push the spring down, the greater the force with which it bounces back. But a weak spring is often a more appropriate analogy for an economy, for when it is pushed too hard, it may simply remain there if its restorative forces are destroyed. Second, as a rule, governments should just focus on price stability. This is simply not appropriate. In countries where inflation is already moderate or low, concerted policy efforts to reduce it further at the margin may yield only small benefits but impose large costs, for it squeezes employment in the short term and dampens growth in the medium term. In my view, the time has come to dispense with these shibboleths, not only to resolve the problem of jobless growth, but also to revive economic growth. In industrialized countries, it is necessary to revive wage-led growth and strengthen profit-led growth. For the former, there are two essentials. the restoration of full employment as an objective, and an increase in real wages. This would ensure that a part of the benefits from growth in output and productivity accrue to workers, which would mean some redistribution of income from profits to wages. That would stimulate consumption demand. For the latter, there has to be some redistribution of profits from the financial sector to the real sector to stimulate investment demand. That would require a closer regulation of innovative financial instruments such as derivative stops in financial markets, which allow profits of the super rich to be invested in financial assets rather than in real products. In developing countries, wage-led growth is possible only through employment creation, even if full employment is not an attainable objective, as it would drive growth through expanding consumption in the domestic market. It is just as important to stimulate investment demand, not simply for profit-led growth on the demand side, but also for creating production capacities on the supply side. There are complementarities between public investment in infrastructure and private investment in manufacturing that could be exploited. At the same time, it would be wise to hasten slowly in financial deregulation and liberalization, which could redistribute profits from the real sector to the financial sector that could, in turn, dampen investment in manufacturing and curb the potential for employment creation. The moral of the story is clear enough. There are no trade-offs between job creation and output growth, so that it is misleading to present it as an either-or choice. In fact, there are strong complementarities between employment creation and economic growth. Growth can create jobs, and jobs can drive growth. Indeed, the two can reinforce each other through an interaction between the supply side and the demand side to create a virtuous circle of cumulative causation. It is just as important to recognize that more employment generation or faster job creation in the process of economic growth would simultaneously address the problem of increasing economic inequality between people by reducing inequality or preventing it from rising as much as it otherwise would. Similarly, an improvement in the quality of employment, which provides decent work, would also contribute to a reduction in economic inequalities. This is particularly important in developing countries where average income levels are low, but it is just as significant in industrialized countries where average income levels are much higher. The conclusion that follows is simple. Employment is the solution, which must not be seen as a problem. For people who do not have the income to meet their basic needs, such as food, clothing, and shelter, let alone healthcare and education, employment opportunities are the only sustainable means of reducing and eradicating their poverty. But that is not all. In poor countries, employment can drive economic growth both from the supply side and the demand side. The pursuit of full employment in industrialized countries and employment expansion in emerging economies could revive economic growth and drive recovery in the world economy. At the same time, employment in the form of decent work that yields sufficient incomes could do much to address the problems associated with rising economic inequalities between people. In this context, it is necessary to recognize that while the number of jobs created makes a difference, the quality of employment also matters. This is so because the world of work is diverse. Everyone works in one way or another, but not everyone is employed. A significant proportion of this work, however, is not sufficiently recognized or adequately rewarded. There are many who work hard for a living. There are a few who hardly work and yet lead a comfortable life. There are others who work but are not paid for their labor. The reality is complex and changing. The developing world is full of overworked and underemployed or unemployed people. Many of them do not earn enough to meet their basic human needs. Working conditions are poor, even in the formal sector, and often worse in the informal sector. For a large proportion of the workforce, there is little, if any, security of employment. In industrialized countries, unemployment rates are much higher than in the past. Social protection is being diluted, risk is being privatized, hence the unemployed are more vulnerable. There is also a casualization of the workforce as permanent employees in the workplace are being turned into contract workers at home who are engaged for limited durations or specified purposes so that work no longer means what it did. For such people, there is no security of employment. Superannuation benefits and healthcare benefits provided by employers also cease. It would seem that for a large number of people, the quality of employment is poor in developing countries and worsening in industrialized countries. In this situation, if employment created also provides decent work, it would be more effective in mitigating the rising inequality between people. The moral of the story, then, is that a focus on employment as the primary objective rather than a residual outcome is absolutely essential. Conventional thinking seeks to focus on the objectives of GDP growth at a macro level and productivity growth at a micro level. There is perhaps a more useful way of thinking about GDP growth directly in terms of employment growth. The growth of employment and the growth in labor productivity measured as output per worker together add up to the growth in GDP. If the employment growth rate is increased by 1%, the GDP growth rate would also increase, provided labor productivity does not fall by 1% or more. In other words, if it's possible to raise the employment growth rate without inducing an equivalent or greater reduction in labor productivity growth, the growth rate of the economy can only be higher. It should thus be possible to focus on employment growth as an objective. This should also lead, I believe, to some rethinking about the meaning of efficiency beyond the usual conceptions of economic efficiency or technical efficiency. Indeed, employment expansion is at least as important as productivity increase. In a sense, both represent the utilization of labor as a resource. Why then is thinking about efficiency focus on one and neglect the other? It is time perhaps to reflect on the meaning of efficiency, which must extend beyond output per worker or productivity increase to expansion of employment and labor use. Such an idea could make a real difference. In conclusion, it is worth reiterating my messages for each of the three constituencies in the tripartite ILO world. Governments should rethink macroeconomic policies by redefining policy objectives and reconsidering policy instruments so that the focus is on fostering employment creation and supporting economic growth rather than on price stability and balanced budgets. Employers should recognize that wages are costs on the supply side but are also incomes on the demand side, which means that profit-led growth and wage-led growth are complements, not substitutes, and that what is good for employment is good for economic growth where the connection is causal. Trade unions represent their members who are employed, but they should also attempt to speak for, even if they do not represent the unemployed or the underemployed, so that in situations of unemployment, they should use their voice in the political process and influence on economic policies to maximize employment levels and, if possible, return to full employment, as the pursuit of this objective would be in the collective interests of workers. It is time, perhaps, for all three constituencies to strive for a social contract. I would also urge, as a last word, the ministers of labour present here to stress the critical importance of employment in their own political processes so that it is centre stage in thinking about the economy in their national context and the debate on the post-2015 development agenda in the international context. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of all of us, I want to stress our gratitude to Professor Nayar. The perceptions and ideas that you set out will undoubtedly guide our panel today, as well as the interactive session that will take place afterward. I also want to remember your work during the debates of the Work Commission on Social Dimension of Globalization that were an essential point of inflection in the debates at the ILO. Professor Nayar, again, thanks.